I'd like to welcome you to the Talking Security with Caliber podcast. I've got Mike Sheward with me. Mike, how you doing?
I am very good, thanks. How you doing, Tab?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you. It's good to see you. You're looking dapper, man. How's
I
the
know I
uh,
made
how's
an
the
effort.
weather? Yeah, man, sure did. Is that a Mariner hat that you have in the background? A little trident? Looks like
Yes,
it. Yeah,
that's my Mariners
yeah.
hat.
Very
Amongst
cool.
my many hats collection, which could be a metaphor for my work life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it really could. That really could be a metaphor for your work life. So, Mike, thanks for joining us. I don't want to go into who you work for and that because I like to leave you with this being about you and me, not about the company you're working with or working for. And because I think that's important that when you and I talk, we're just talking a couple of guys about about security and whatever. But I want to start.
Yep.
I picked up your book, right? And then I found out it's not the book, right? It's one of the books, right? And I got to put on my glasses because I was looking at this. I mean, you got how many books do you have? I mean, like Pen Test Diaries, the Blue Team Diaries mixed up, uh, Ghost
Yeah,
Resources, Post Traumatic. I mean, you, dude, you're all over the place.
yeah. So there's five books total. So printed books, that is. So there's two nonfiction ones. One's about forensic, one's about security operations, and then there are three fiction books, which are both collections of short stories. So, Digital Forensic Diaries is five short stories in one book, and the same is true of Pen Test Diaries and Blue Team Diaries. But you can buy them, as individual stories on Kindle as well. So yeah, it's just different formats, but there's five books total.
So, we'll talk about whatever we want to talk about, right? It's us doing this, but I've written a book, and I'm in the process of my second and third book. But as busy as you are, I'm always impressed by, a guy that's whoop. There we go. A guy that just continues to write. Where do you find the time to write so much?
So it used to be that the fiction books is kind of a hobby of mine, right? Like it's not my main thing. So it's usually kind of as and when I find the time to just kind of start working on them. And if I'm doing one story at a time, then they're all pretty short. So it could take a few weeks, but like they're not the longest things in the world to write. But it used to be the case that I would, when I was commuting into Seattle from where I live on the Kitsap Peninsula, I could do a lot of writing on the ferry. Um, and there's no Wi-Fi on the ferry, right? So you're pretty much there alone without too many distractions. So I'd have like an hour a day to do it, and that really helped. And then obviously kind of supplement that with stuff at weekends and whatever. But now that I don't really commute anywhere, it's definitely gotten trickier to set aside time for writing because you're sitting in front of a computer all day from the moment you get up to the moment you wrap up, and it's like, do I really want to sit here more and do some writing? But it's enjoyable once you get into it. It's good fun, and I tend to go like long periods without doing anything, and then being able to just kind of just go for it and really get into it. It's weird how it works, but yeah, I enjoy it. But what's weird is like um, throughout school, I absolutely hated writing, and it was just never something that I did. And so like it was just weird that I picked it up as a hobby, and I was kind of inspired to do it because there was this TV show. This is how I got started. There's this TV show called Scorpion that was on one of the major channels like a few years ago, and it was basically like a CSI cyber style
Hmm.
drama. And
Did
my
Ted
wife was
Danson
my
play
wife.
in that?
I can't remember. It was some
I
fella that
can't. Be
was
there.
in. It was a British guy who was the lead guy, and I know that because he was in a TV show called Casualty, which was on Saturday nights on the BBC when I lived in England. But that my wife gets really excited when there's shows that we can watch together, right? And she thought that this would be a real good show for us because it's all about cybers, and I'm into that. And so we sat down to watch the first episode of Scorpion, and I think I got to the point where they were uh, trying to do something with a Boeing 747 by running an Ethernet cable down the landing gear while it was in flight to download something or upload something to it. And I just got too annoyed to continue watching it. And that was the last time I ever watched it. And I was like, all these stories that they put on TV about information security stuff is just, it's all garbage. Like, it's all made up. It's designed to be super impressive and Hollywoody and all that kind of stuff. But I get it, but it's just so infuriating to watch. So I sat down and I was like, I'm gonna write some of the actual stories from actual experience because they're quite interesting anyway without all the Hollywood stuff on it. And so that's how I got started. I started to write Digital Forensic Diaries like a couple of days after being annoyed by that. Nothing motivates me quite like being annoyed. So that was how I got started. I got started by being very
Uh,
annoyed at the television.
and here you are a writer. Now, all this time later, and you're a writer, and it's interesting because I never when I started writing, I started I was kind of in a dark place, and so I wrote a paper to myself, like because I had had this like great moment of like clarity and whatever. So I wrote a paper to myself, but it was so long. I was like, oh, that's like a chapter in a book. And then it happened to me again, and I was like, that's chapter two, and I was like, maybe I'm writing a book. And then like I think you probably have this feeling too, where once you start doing it, it's kind of addicting, and
Yes,
you
it
really
is.
enjoy it. So we talked just briefly a couple weeks ago about what it takes to like prepare, you know, like for forensics, or even more so like um, how do you avoid it? Like what are the really easy pitfalls that you can avoid as a company that people just like maybe they get lazy or something.
Yeah, it's all about credentials is the killer at the moment. There used to be this thing where you'd have a competition to see what was the longest uptime you could find on a network device. And for me, my record was 8 years. Right, I found a Cisco switch once that had been up for about 8 years. But now that's changed to what are the oldest credentials you can find. And I found relatively recently like some AWS credentials that were about 9 years old. Um,
Wow.
and it's stuff like that, right? Like um, people have, there's a lot of just kind of companies that have grown up out of people experimenting on AWS and spinning stuff up, and not just AWS, but other cloud services as well. And so they kind of seeded their AWS account with the initial batch of credentials. They built all the scripts and things that glue it together against those credentials. And now they're a decade down the line and they still haven't changed them, and they're too scared to change them because they think something's going to break. But everybody that ever worked at that company ever has had access to those credentials at some point. And it's something as
Yeah.
simple as that that leads to a lot of like the forensic work and incident response that we see, because those credentials just get stored in repos and accidentally committed to the internet and stuff like that. So it's those are
Mhm.
the biggest things, and just changing your habits to kind of get away from the traditional approach of like hard coding or creating a set of credentials that last for years in a service, and instead kind of moving to like time bound stuff. That's one thing. And then obviously kind of at the moment, in tech especially, the big kind of trend or theme, if you like, is that there's a lot of layoffs happening and things at the moment.
Mhm.
And there was actually since we talked about this, there was a dark reading article about how the majority of former employees of companies' credentials still work after they've been let go. And we were saying, like, we were talking about this before, that um, going through having seen so many companies do these massive layoffs, there is absolutely no way that they are on top of offboarding all these people properly. So there's probably like a ticking time bomb of all these old credentials out there that still work, nobody really knows about, and are going to bite some people at some point. So yeah, credentials really can screw up your business if they're not properly handled, and lead to a lot of forensic investigation to figure out who got a hold of them and what they did.
It seems like such a simple thing to do, right? I mean, like just shut people down, just disable credentials. Obviously, is it just lazy? I mean, is it simple laziness? Like companies don't do it, or they don't have policies, or there's nobody that's like there that's responsible for it. Is there like a trend that you see?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's not necessarily laziness. I think it's just lack of knowledge as to where the systems and the credentials are actually in use, right? So,
Mm.
um, to use the kind of overloaded marketing term, shadow IT, um, we have there's a bunch of just cloud software services out there and things that are holding a lot of companies together that nobody has ever heard of,
Hmm.
and nobody in the IT team, I should say, right? Like people have just run off, put stuff on company cards, and it's kind of holding the business together. And they've done their own procurement, and they've bypassed a lot of those processes. So if nobody knows those things are there, then nobody's going to be able to know about offboarding them or to include them in that sort of stuff. So that's a big part of it. um, and that goes for like, all teams in all companies. They all kind of go off and experiment with their own things, and things lead to uh, things go to production that you might not necessarily know about, and all that kind of stuff. So that's one thing. um, the second thing is, people, as we've kind of gotten more tools that are designed to kind of assist with like hybrid and remote work and things like that, and instant messaging tools, collaboration tools, and things like that. I've seen plenty of cases where people have stored credentials in those kind of tools, and
Hmm.
have accidentally leaked them by uh, exposing them too broadly within the company, or putting them on a file share and then accidentally opening that file share up to the world, that kind of thing. All of these factors kind of combine. There's a lot of kind of um, shared credentials and things like that that people just don't want to touch because they're just too afraid to see what will break, which is no way of living really. But that's how it is for a lot of places. They just don't want to, a rotation of some system that's been around for a couple of years that isn't properly documented could be an incident, right? Could be an outage. So people are just nervous about that.
So that all to me sounds like a hairball, right? Like you got all these things going on out there, and probably the larger the company is, the more difficult it is to manage that. So maybe if you're, maybe not, but I'm thinking if you're a small company, like our company, like Caliber, it's like okay, where's it at? But if you're going through a layoff or whatever, and there's a lot of people, there's a lot of turnover. I mean that becomes much more difficult. I mean, is there a way that companies can like really manage this well, or is
Yeah.
it just like
So
you're screwed?
yeah. So there's a couple of very very successful companies in the space now, and in fact, that number of companies in the space that's kind of it's kind of diminishing because Okta's buying them all. So Okta is kind of like the category king of the identity and access management space. So they have their tool is obviously they picked up on the fact that people were moving to cloud, and that everybody was kind of moving off of like Active Directory and centralized directories, and they needed a directory that could go further into different systems. Um, so a lot of companies have spent the last few years kind of retrofitting Okta to their existing infrastructure and capturing as much as they can and things like that with SSO, and um, making it so that they can manage all their users through there. But for companies that are starting out, and they're starting out, not just in Okta, but in like Google Workspace or Microsoft Azure with Azure AD, um, having those systems be the kind of source of truth for authentication from day one is a huge advantage from somebody that has to go back and kind of retrofit everything, because it's very difficult to go look at a system that's been around for a number of years and say we're going to put this on Okta or Google or One Login or Ping or whatever, and we're going to make it so you can only go through and look at that and log in through that. That's tricky because it's quite easy to go through and break things as you retrofit them. But if you're doing it from day one and you set up kind of like the authentication piece and the provisioning piece through these kind of tools, because you're a smaller company and you're just starting out using them, you have a huge advantage, and you should absolutely maximize that when talking to prospective customers as well.
Hmm. Hey, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit, all right? Because I love stories, and it, as I looked at your book and I read your book, some great stories, but then I find out, like we talked about at the beginning, like you got a lot of books and you got a lot of stories. Out of everything that you've experienced, what's your best story?
That's a good question. Um,
And feel free to make it up on the
so
fly, just lie, just like, or use somebody else's
yeah,
story. That's what I do.
well, there's plenty of them, right? So I would say
Yeah.
there's one that I particularly like because it's a very interesting story. And it's also in the public domain because it's been through the legal system, so I can talk more
Hmm.
easily about it. All the stories that I write about, by the way, like in Pen Test Diaries, Blue Team Diaries, Digital Forensic Diaries, they're all real, but obviously there are these things called NDAs that you sign when you sign on to do work for people. And I respect those, so I can't actually just
Hmm.
go off and talk about like the specifics. So what I do is I change the industries and things like that are involved to still keep the technical elements the same, but change the names and people involved just to protect the innocent and not so innocent. But probably my favorite one, and you can find out all about this by searching for it if you're any good at using Google, was a story from a few years ago. So I worked at a company that did kind of travel and expense management stuff. Again, not very difficult to work that out if you can use Google and LinkedIn. And we had a customer of ours that reached out and said, "Hey, um, somebody is doing something weird with our account, and we don't know what's going on." And it was about a week after the Heartbleed vulnerability had been a thing, and we responded to Heartbleed, and we had a couple of things we had to patch. They were not production systems, so we were in pretty good shape in the Heartbleed response. um, but this was about a week afterwards, and we got this report, and essentially what had happened is one of our customers had a bunch of weird stuff happen, including their expense reports for all their employees had been rejected with this kind of ominous message: "My heart bleeds for you," right? So, and then there was some code in there, like a snippet of the Heartbleed exploit code in there as well. Um, so they thought, oh no, and rightly so. Like it made sense. They were like, oh, this company must be vulnerable to Heartbleed. Somebody's got in using this, got a password somehow, and is now rejecting all our expense reports and causing us problems. At the same time, they also had had an MDM system they used internally, mobile device management, and for some of their customers as well, they used it. They managed an MDM for them, and this giant customer in the UK of theirs awoke one day to find that all the mobile devices in their environment had been locked, and the same ominous message was on there, like "My heart bleeds for you." And so they'd locked all these devices, mobiles, and various laptops and things like that. So basically, they'd locked out the company that was our customer, and the customer's customer, if you like, of all their devices remotely. Anyway, we did a bunch of research on it. Couldn't figure out. We're convinced that nothing had actually happened. That somebody had exploited Heartbleed to get into our systems. Um, and what we found out was the vector that somebody had used. They, the customer of ours, had reused somebody else's old account when the account holder changed. So rather than creating a new user in the system, they basically just renamed the user account, didn't change the passwords or anything like that. So it was still the same user ID and password combination, but with a different name on it for somebody who changed positions, and it was somebody in finance or something like that. And the old person in finance had actually been fired and was not very happy about it. And they used their persistent access to, they still had access through the mobile app and things like that. They used all their old access to go in there and kind of terrorize this company as kind of retaliation. um, it was pretty obvious, like when you combined the um, our stuff plus what else was going on, that this was, what was happening. Just somebody using their old legacy access to go in and just cause all sorts of hassle for them. And yeah, that's a good story because that's a perfect example of what we were just talking about, right? Like somebody had a bunch of access, they got let go from the company, they maintained that access, and they caused real damage. Like the company that was ultimately the most affected by this was this giant insurance company in the UK, and they were, completely locked out of their IT for a couple of days while it was all kind of undone. And yeah, it was a very interesting one for us because we were, digging into everything to make sure that there was absolutely no sign that anything bad had happened on our systems. And I was, I'm super anxious, right? Like I will look into everything a million times over. And I spent hours just looking through absolutely everything to convince myself that we weren't missing anything, like, and that we weren't vulnerable to Heartbleed. But yeah, we that one. That one was not us. It was, this former employee person. And if you want to read the full story, it's the story that's based on it is Revenge on the Wire, which is in Digital Forensic Diaries.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, I know, right?
Hey,
I linked that up
so
quite well. I didn't
yeah,
even plan that. That just happened. So
no, dude, that's all right though, man. So question: what happened to this person? That I mean, they're disgruntled. I mean, you're going to give away the story if I asked you, and I did. What happened to them?
they did some jail time and got a pretty hefty fine. So in the UK, the law is the Computer Misuse Act, and that's what they got charged under. There are different sections of that, and they got charged under one of those sections. And yeah, they did a bit of jail time and got fined, and obviously, had. I would imagine some challenges finding future employment because that kind of stuff sticks around, and it was all very, very public and very messy.
And all because the individual was disgruntled.
Yep.
That's the reason, right? We so often we think about like an external malicious individual, and so often it's not that. It's either somebody who maybe they don't know, maybe they're not intentionally malicious, but then you got a guy like this, or I assume it's a guy, but you got an individual that's openly malicious to it. How did this? I mean, all of that ended up. I'm gonna do a pun. It ended up bleeding over to this other company, right? Sorry, I had to do
Yep.
that. And,
No, it's good.
and yeah, I know it's amazing, like attempt at dad humor. So, did they find out that this individual intentionally used my heart bleeds for you because of Heartbleed, and that they thought that
Yep.
if they did that, they could put you off
Yeah, that
Huh.
was exactly it. It was 100% trying to use that as kind of cover for what had happened. And it was just timing on their part. I think they'd been kind of let go a few weeks before the uh, the Heartbleed vulnerability was kind of made public. So for them, they saw this perfect opportunity to just jump into the chaos and make it worse. And yeah, they really did have an impact on their former employer, because I believe, well, there was a financial impact because they lost a bunch of clients, including this, giant client that was directly impacted. And then they they ended up having to like change the company name and things like that, right? Because they couldn't escape the stories and things. And I don't even know if that particular company is still around anymore, but definitely not in the same form that it was at the time.
It's interesting. Something bad happens, so you change the name so you can avoid that. It always reminds me of anybody who knows the name Jeff Gillooly. And Jeff Gillooly was Tanya Harding's husband, who took the rod and whacked Nancy Kerrigan, and he wouldn't change his name to Jeff Stone because the name Gillooly had too many negative connotations. That just always made me laugh because it's like it had a negative connotation because you did something wrong, and it kind of
Right.
goes back. It goes back to this company, and what that company didn't do, right? And that was making sure that those credentials just were revoked. And I mean, how obviously that's not most former employees are just going to go away and say, even if they're disgruntled, they may say bad things, right? Like, oh yeah, they suck because of whatever, but they're not going to like go and go, are my credentials still active, and can I go out and do harm to them? But any guess or estimate on how prevalent this could be if you had an individual like that?
It's hard to say, but I think like it's I think it's becoming more likely than not, because especially in like tech companies, because tech companies really push the idea that, and this has probably changed a bit over the past year and a bit with all the layoffs, but they push the idea that, um, you're part of the family, and you're part of the culture, and everything they kind of get people really into their ways of working, to the point where they almost forget that it's a job, right? And you see stories like, people who have been laid off and stuff, and the way they find out is they open up their laptops and they can't log in,
It's,
right? And
yep.
that's kind of how it's meant to be done, right, by the book. But that's kind of when people really realize, oh, this wasn't more than a job. This was not my family or anything like that. This was just a job, and now I don't have it anymore, and now I have to go and find another one. And I think, the fact that people, at these companies, kind of go out their way to kind of sell the cultures, and there's marketing that these companies do around their cultures to try and get people on board, to try and hire people. It's a big emotional decision to go take another job, right? Because people don't like leaving one culture that they're happy with to go to another one that might be a bit different. And I think that, once people are hit with that kind of reality that, oh crap, this was just a job and now I have to go find another one, and I'm not part of the family anymore, then, um, human beings are very emotional creatures, and some of them will some of them will be angry for a bit. Some of them will think, I have stock options still. I should probably not do anything bad because there's still a chance I could, make out down the road. And some of them will, be more, forthright in their reaction, shall we say. So it's kind of a combination of, both those factors, kind of the human emotion, and the fact that in some ways, a lot of companies have kind of made the situation more likely to happen for themselves because of the way that they've kind of told people, hey, you're part of the family and you're part of the culture and it's all very important and all this kind of stuff. And then suddenly they pull the rug out from underneath them.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about that. We've had a couple of examples recently. One of them maybe a year ago. One of them just recently, but a year ago, where the CEO basically got everybody online on a Zoom call and just said, you know, something like, if you got an email from me right now, you're fired. I don't know, something like that. And then one just recently where the CEO had said, basically, if don't cry about not getting your bonus or something like that. But it was very abrupt and very public. And people are getting better at being able to do things like record or do things where it's not easily traceable back to like who did that thing. And as individuals, as security people, maybe we're jaded in thinking or just knowing that it's a job, right? And even though I'm a CEO of a company, in the back of my head, I still have to think I've got to do fiduciary responsibility and things for the company and make sure that things are done well. And that if it's not done right, that whole thing gets kind of gross and disgusting and sleazy and that. And then you add into that people getting, just showing up to turn on their laptop and their laptop doesn't work anymore. And they call IT and what's going on, and they find out I no longer have a job or whatever. We've just got a couple of minutes. What is there anything that you look at and you're like, this particular thing inside of forensics is really interesting right now? Like this thing really has my attention. Is there anything like that?
I am very into cloud forensics. With I don't think I'll ever probably, or I might do. You never know. I used to have to go into data centers and pull hard drives out of servers and stuff like that, and image them one at a time and reconstruct RAID images and things like that. It would take forever, and it was all good fun, but it would take. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. So I am super into kind of making sure that um, when I'm working with people that are in AWS and things like that, that all of those things are logging to some other system. We have this kind of convergence where the people that are responsible for um, setting up a lot of the logging and controls around those cloud environments are the same people that have the super access to do all the things anyway. So I'm very into making sure that those kind of things are offloaded to systems where there's some kind of separation so that you never lose that audit trail. I think that's a very interesting area. And I think that something that I've been kind of looking more into as well, there's this kind of new wave of IoT devices where um, people are kind of waking up to the fact that connectivity is not guaranteed in all situations. So there's a lot of smart devices out there now that are kind of being built with this mindset of um, we need to have a backup plan in case there isn't fixed connectivity in the form of cellular or Wi-Fi connectivity. So there's onboard storage and kind of asynchronous stuff that happens to relay information back when connectivity is restored. So I find breaking open those kind of devices and dumping the firmware and trying to figure out what's going on and what's stored in there and how they're secured is super interesting.
Cool. Well, Mike, thanks for joining me today. This is unbelievably fun. And for anybody out there watching, are listening, Digital Forensic Diaries, and maybe there's a lot of other books, but maybe, who knows, Digital Cloud Diaries is coming. All sorts of stuff as you continue to write. I know you can get it on Amazon, but Mike, I just want to say thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It was good fun.
Yeah, good times. Thank you.